G'day mate, 40 here, taking a break from potting plants to reflect more on the magic key. So we all want one simple explanation for how the world works. So people who believe in monetarism in economics, they want to believe that inflation is essentially determined by the money supply. And people who believe in Christianity, they want to believe that salvation is determined by your theological beliefs, your belief or lack thereof in their Savior, Messiah, God. And you see this with one-note people, like people who just, everything goes back to Christianity or to Torah or to Marxism or libertarian economics. So people love that simple explanation, and I love it too. So I think there are domain-specific magic keys. So, for example, IQ, more than any other single variable, will explain somebody's success or lack thereof at work. IQ, more than any other explanatory variable, will account for group achievement in education. So I think there are domain-specific magic keys. So there's nothing wrong with trying to figure out what's the key to this particular situation or this particular problem. But the world is incredibly complex, and so we always keep wanting to boil it down, and we have no choice, right? Because of the complexity of life, we have to boil things down to a few magic keys. So think about the National Football League, a quarterback, all right? He's about to take a snap, and he looks at the defense, and he wants to see where the safety is. What's the average IQ of Luke Ford's viewers? So I would say it's about my IQ, so about 120. So let's say you're playing the Dallas Cowboys, and you want to account for where is Micah Parsons, like where is he rushing? Is he rushing from the right, rushing from the left? So where is the safety? So the safety's up to stop the run, or the safety's back to stop the long pass. So the Dallas Cowboys, for example, they've gone through a big offensive slump the past 5 weeks prior to Sunday's game, 56-14 over Washington, but they had a 5-week offensive slump because perhaps in part because defenses were playing two safeties back. So defenses were taking away the long pass and forcing the Cowboys just to dink and dunk down the field. And with the additional problem of the lack of an unproductive running game, that essentially seemed to squelch the Dallas Cowboys offense. So a quarterback wants to see where the safeties are, right? Those are keys. We may want to see where the key, the Lawrence Taylor-like defender is, and like who's the Mike, right? The Mike is the linebacker who is calling the plays. So I think my IQ is in the 120s. I think my dad's was 137. So I'm not particularly high, but I think I'm pretty good in verbal IQ. So there are situation-specific magic keys, but there's not general magic keys. So think about Darwin's Origin of Species. Like, this is such a fantastic work of science. It's just a complete role model for how to do science, because he sets out all sorts of forms of evidence for his theory, and then he also lays out evidence that would invalidate his theory. And Charles Darwin's Origin of Species is incredibly productive, incredibly important, probably the most important book of the last 200 years. Now, many religious people wanted to debunk it and still do, because it makes understanding life more complicated, right? Instead of just being out to saying, God did this, God did that, there are obviously more variables. So I find it tiring when people reduce life to one or two key variables, the Jews or the capitalists or the communists or the Marxists or the globalists. Right? I find that tiring. So people on the alt-right sometimes just want to, Luke's on a boat, or is it early onset Parkinson's? Luke is absolutely exhausted from potting. So I've been potting plants, moving plants from smaller plots to bigger plots, and I'm tired, man. I haven't done manual labor for about 30 years. So I'm lifting and using shovel and wheeling around a wheelbarrow and just trying to be a useful manual laborer, and I'm absolutely exhausted. But I love the analogy of situation that a quarterback faces. So when a quarterback has about, say, 10 seconds before he has the ball hiked, he's looking at the defense, and there are magic keys to the defense, right? So you account for maybe the defender's key best player, or you account for what the safeties are doing, how many are in the box. So when Dak Prescott comes to the line of scrimmage, he always has, as I understand it, two plays called. There's a primary play, and then he can kill it at the line of scrimmage if he sees the defense lined up a particular way. So there are keys in life and in situations. So, for example, job interviews are not predictive of job performance, except to the extent that you get a sense of somebody's IQ. Now, IQ is more predictive of job performance, particularly in cognitively demanding tasks, than any other single variable. Like IQ is more predictive of income levels and educational attainment than any other single variable. So is it legal to talk about American football? So American football is increasingly popular over here. It's not one of the top 3 sports, but if these explanations are effective, at least they may allow for action, which is a step forward when the alternative is inaction. Yeah. So life is complicated, so we develop some keys, right? So that is a heuristic. It's a good enough understanding and explanation model. It's not perfect, and so we're constantly having to take action without adequate information, and so to do the best that we can with a world that constantly demands that we make choices and take action, then we do have certain keys, such as like what's the intelligence of the people I'm dealing with, what's the honesty of the people I'm dealing with, like who are my friends, who are my enemies, like what's my tribe, what's my in-group, what's my out-group. Like these can be useful keys in some situations of conflict, or like who are the people that I trust in a particular area. So I may trust some people in matters of business, and trust other people in, say, matters of geology, and trust other people in matters of philosophy. Obviously, if I've got a question about philosophy, I'm blessed to have about 5 philosophers in my life. So I don't think that I know more about philosophy than any of those people. So there are keys, I think, to different situations, but there's no one magic key to explain all of life. Like modernity means that no one narrative is adequate for understanding the challenges that are before us. So one narrative may help spiritually, say with 12-step recovery, but that's not necessarily going to help you in business. It's not necessarily going to help you navigate your love life or your finances, or issues that come up in your community. So I love keys, and sometimes keys can be incredibly useful, just like a quarterback looking at defense, seeing where the safeties line up. Incredibly useful. They don't have to be perfect, but just knowing where the safeties line up is not going to be adequate. Have you heard of metamodernism? No, I have not heard of metamodernism, so I can just barely get around my mind around postmodernism, which is the idea that no one narrative is adequate. So there's a terrific book I read on how football explains postmodernism and postmodernism explains football. So Australia's won the 3rd test now. We've retained the Ashes. We're heading into an election. I'm enjoying myself very much in Australia. I'm enjoying myself spending time with family, so I'm not reading nearly as much, so I'm not doing as many streams. I'm spending time doing manual labor, I'm spending time with family. So not reading as many books, not developing as many political thoughts, just enjoying tranquil, coherent, cohesive life here in Tenham Sands.